you and I met about 15 years ago.
Yeah.
What people don't know about Replit, it's a 10-year overnight success story.
That's right.
15 years ago, we met actually in a hackathon in Lebanon, out of all places.
Yes.
And you're working on Replit as an open source project.
That's right. Yes.
Walk us a little bit through that early journey.
Yeah, so I was going to school back in Jordan, and I was really interested in learning as much programming languages as I can. And I'm sure a lot of you are software engineers. You know how still painful it is to set up a programming environment. Spend hours and hours downloading software, setting it up. God forbid you want to share a program with someone or you want to host it. So I started thinking about, well, it should be just in the browser. So you should be able to open a new browser tab and start coding. And surprisingly, there wasn't any software that did that, back in 2009 or something like that. So I started working on it, and I got a very simple thing going very quickly. As it usually is the case, I thought it's going to take me a week to get the whole thing done. And now, 15 years later, still working on it. But I was able to get like a small kind of JavaScript interpreter going. And my friends really liked it. And then I started adding different programming languages. I know MIT, at least, used to be a big Lisp school. So I added Scheme as the second language. And then had a breakthrough, and we were the first to compile Python to JavaScript. So we were able to compile the C Python interpreter to JavaScript, and open sourced the project. And suddenly it went viral. It was on Hacker News. It was getting forked and stars in GitHub. I was getting really excited. And it coincided with this kind of MOOC revolution that's been happening in the US. At the time, there was Udacity and other companies, but most famously, Codecademy put up the first interactive programming exercises on the web, and they were using my software. So they reached out to me and said, you should come work for us. I'm like, no, this is all infrastructure for the company that I want to build, Replit. But they flew out to Jordan, finally gave me an offer I couldn't refuse, got me an O1 visa, came to New York, and spent a couple of years at Codecademy. I'm very proud of the work we've done there. A lot of people, millions of people learned to code on it. And then did a stint at Facebook, worked on React.js and React Native. And then 2016, finally, have my green card, have $30,000 of savings. I'm like, okay, now it's the time to start the companies. That's when we started Replit. And the kind of vision sort of evolved since then. And we're like, okay, we want to make it so that anyone can be able to make software. And that was such a bold thing at the time, but now it seems obvious.
Yeah, I think your story resonates a lot, at least on the immigrant visa path and green card building. Yeah. But it seems like you also have been almost like waiting for the moment where large language models would come about.
Yeah.
And it feels to me, just knowing you and seeing how you think and if your writings, you like thinking and almost trying to predict where things are going. Mm-hmm. How important is it for founders to think about where their space is going and trying to build almost before things get to the place where you get that liftoff? That makes sense.
By the way, Habib built the first kind of language model startup probably in the world with the Yamli, which was hugely inspiring. A lot of founders in the region were really inspired by what you built. I don't know how many people know about it at this point, but yeah, language models were clearly going to affect programming. It was obvious even back in. Anyone who's reading literature, I'm sure a lot of you were at the time, but there was this paper in 2012 called On the Naturalness of Software. Anyone here read it? No? You should check it out. Basically, researchers used Ngram models to be able to do a really powerful autocomplete model. I remember reading that, and especially, been working at Codecademy and kind of the predecessor to Replit, been doing a lot of work on compilers and parsers, and it just always felt laborious. It always felt like something that could be learned via machine learning. And so every year, when NLP and language models would get better, and neural networks, I would try it again, and it just wouldn't work very well. Until finally, GPT-2 was the first time that I thought, okay, we're almost here. and GPT-3 we started building with language models. Initially, it didn't really impact our product all that much. Ultimately, learning to code was still the biggest bottleneck for people to get into programming. We had solved the development infrastructure issue. We have, Replit, at that point, had deployments, had collaboration. It was a complete platform, but still we couldn't get a lot more programmers to get started with making software because coding was still very difficult. So in 2023 at TED AI, I gave a talk about the future of software engineering with agents. And I felt like we're getting close to that. In 2024, just went all in and said that agents are just around the corner. In September 2024, we launched Replit Agent in beta. And it was the first, I think it was the first purely natural language-based programming environment where you can go all the way from an idea to a deployed app.
And it feels to me as well like just having this longitudinal view on what's to come next, but also spending a lot of time on building the infrastructure gave you a lot of advantage comparing Replit to competitors. You do a lot of things on the lower part of the stack.
Yeah, we went all the way down to like file systems for us to solve collaboration, which ended up, a lot of it sort of accidentally kind of turned out to be useful for AI. But for example, we built a copy and write file system that made it really easy to fork and branch and collaborate between like two humans on a programming environment. And now we use it for multiple agents. So Replit Agents is actually a team of agents. And oftentimes they need to fork or be in a separate sandbox. And so, yeah, we went all the way down to the operating system layer and then all the way up. And I think, so I can say this because I'm sure there's a lot of researchers and PhDs in the audience, but I think for a long time, Silicon Valley was not paying attention to the literature and what's coming down the line. So having a little bit of view of what's going to happen next year or the year after, and constantly at Replit, we're just trying to predict what's going to happen next so we can build towards it.
We and I talked before this panel, and we were talking about the future and thinking about the future, also about the past. And I mentioned that Mitch Resnick, a professor at the Media Lab who invented Scratch. Some of you might know Scratch, maybe your kids have used Scratch. And what was interesting is that an early abstraction of code and kind of some of the early ways of vibe coding, but even vibe coding goes way beyond that you were sharing with me.
Well, speaking of MIT Media Lab, goes back to Logo with Seymour Papert.
Seymour Papert, yes.
Yeah, so Logo was very, very simple. I mean, it's sort of like vibe coding. Like a 5-year-old can use Logo. It's just like the command and the number. And I remember one of my earliest programming experience at school was in Logo as well. There's a long history of what we might call vibe coding today. A lot of researchers always wanted to make programming more like English so that more people can participate in it. When Grace Hopper invented the compiler, she talked about how she wanted programming to be more like English. And she was getting a lot of hate and snobbery from the machine code programmers. She was like, oh, it's all right, you can still program machine code, there's still going to be jobs for you, but there's going to be millions of people that can't do machine code and want to program in English. And that's what she called it. Before Karpathy called it the hot new programming language is English, she did that in the 60s and 70s. And so, yeah, it's been a long push to how do you make programming more accessible, because ultimately, what Alan Kay talks about, the computer revolution hasn't happened yet. That's a line from Alan Kay that was hugely inspiring for me, is that the idea that most people are consumers of computers, not producers of software. So to use computers to their ultimate power is to be able to program them. And finally, we're there, or it feels like it.
So it seems like we're going up the stack in terms of abstraction. What comes after, you think?
In many ways, I think automated software development agents are kind of the arrival spot. It feels like it because at the end of the day, you're just communicating with that entity, and then that entity is doing a lot of programming on your behalf. Now, with Replit, another, I think, good thing that we have this history, because you can always peel on the layers. You can look at the code, you can code yourself, you can look at the underlying dependencies, you could get a terminal on the, so you can pare down the abstraction layers, but ultimately you can also be just at the natural language interface. I will say one thing I'd like to explore is having a more multimodal interface with AI. So, when you talk to a human programmer, you're often in front of either virtual or real whiteboard, kind of whiteboarding and making sure you're aligning. A lot of the times when people are unhappy with Replit, their prompts tend to be really poor. And they don't spend a lot of time trying to align with AI on what they want to build. So there's a lot more work to be done on the UX of communicating with automated agents. But I do think agents is probably where we're going to spend the next decades kind of just making them better and better.
So Replit has become a force multiplier for software engineers, but also has become a force multiplier for managers. I mean, you at Replit have been using it almost on an organizational structure, folks that have nothing to do with software engineering. How do you think the future of management looks like in a world where everyone can code?
Here's a crazy stat: 75% of our users are non-engineers. 75% at this point, and I think that AI tends to be hugely empowering to the sort of non-trained computer science programmer, because they went from not being able to do anything to having enormous power. I think there are a lot of tools out there that makes engineers 10%, 20%, 50% better. But going from nothing to being able to program, you can't even put a number on that. That's hugely valuable. And so we're starting to see how companies are fundamentally changing because of that, right? So if you just imagine a world where anyone can instantiate a software engineer on demand, they can solve a lot of problems on their own. We have one customer where an operations manager was able to add $50 to $100 million in annual incremental revenue to the company because they had an idea and they couldn't get software engineers. They had an idea for a year, and finally with Replit, they were able to implement it and ship it. And so it's hugely transformational because at any organization, there are people that are closest to the customer, closest to the business problems, and typically they're bottlenecked by software engineers, and suddenly that bottleneck is gone.
So you at Replit, at some point in the last, I think 2022, if I remember well, you were partnered with another E14 company, Mosaic ML, on building your own model, your own large language model, and then you moved to using other companies' models, and now you're kind of in this relationship, tense, maybe I don't know tense, but there's some interesting kind of probably paranoia, I would say, if I were you, yes. Working with folks that could also compete with you. What do you advise founders on this interesting, coexistence with some of the model providers out there?
The model we built with Mosaic was state-of-the-art open source coding model. It was a 3 billion parameter model, and it performed better than commercial models that were 500 billion parameters. And so there was a moment of time where a startup could actually innovate on foundation models, but at some point the amount of investment and data and compute that's going into foundation models just made it, it just didn't make any business sense for us to go down that route since the work is already being done. Now, I think it sort of oscillates. It's sort of how computing goes from centralized to decentralized to centralized. I think there's an oscillation here, and I think at some point in the future, there's going to be a time where, and we saw the early innings of it with DeepSeek. There's going to be a time where using your data and expertise, you can add value and you can create better performance and be able to compete with the foundation.
You'll go back to building your model at some point?
At some point, I think so.
Maybe last question on a personal note. You're a son of Palestinian refugees, and you've been quite vocal about the topic. And some people might have been created even some controversy or tensions online. How do you think that identity for you topic is, and how does that influence you being a leader and building culture around you at Replit?
Yeah, it's been quite disheartening in tech that it is almost controversial to say that I am Palestinian, but I am, and I'm proud of our heritage. And I've watched my father. When we grew up in Jordan, my father started as a government engineer and went all the way to becoming the city manager as a refugee, struggled early in life, and that was hugely inspiring. And our family and a lot of our relatives kind of put a huge emphasis on education, and that's the way to get ahead, and that's the way to rebuild. When you go from scratch, that's what you need to do. And that's been hugely inspiring to me. And then my journey itself, where I can go from son of Palestinian refugees, kid in Jordan, all the way to becoming a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company in the U.S. I feel like that opportunity is amazing, and it's for the first time in human history. You don't need a lot of capital. You don't need a lot of resources to be able to build something amazing, and that kind of drives us at Replit to create more opportunities for people like that. So we have stories of people with, in some cases, nothing but a smartphone, because Replit from the start, we wanted to be ubiquitous, we want to be everywhere, that they can code on their smartphone, they can build something amazing, they can build a startup, and they can go fundraise, or they can get customers. So we're still very early in that regard. Something strange happened in tech where although we invented this technology that should be hugely accessible, Silicon Valley still centralized all the wealth and the power. I think over the next 5-10 years with AI, with products like we're building, we're going to see that power and wealth kind of start distributed across the world.
Amjad, thank you for inspiring us. Keep all the work.
Thank you.
Have a hand for Amjad and Habib.